One ringy dingy.
Hello, Your Eminence.
Hello, Your Effluence. How are you today?
I'm very well.
Oh, good. Well, we haven't talked today, have we?
No.
I didn't think so. That pretty much is proof positive. Whatever we're about ready to talk about is unscripted. So, in that vein, what would you like to talk about today, David?
Well, I'm pretty cross, Phil, because I suddenly realized that these clowns are using my birthday, the 7th of August, 1943, to celebrate an apparent victory over the forces of the good, of which I put myself and you and our various friends around the network, with the embassy bombings in East Africa on the 7th of August of 1988. And I've just put in the chat room something that's blown my mind, which is fairly easily blurable right now. And I'll read it. It's the bombings, the 1998 United States Embassy bombings were a series of attacks that occurred on August the 7th, 1998, in which hundreds of people were killed in simultaneous truck bomb explosions at the United States embassies in the East African capitals of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya. The date of the bombings marked the 8th anniversary of the arrival of American forces in Saudi Arabia. Now, this is the zinger stinger field. The attacks were linked to local members of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, brought Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri to the attention of the American public for the first time, and resulted in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, placing bin Laden on its 10 most wanted fugitive lists. What does that suggest to you, Field?
I wasn't listening. Let me just read it. The FBI also connected to Azerbaijan as 60 calls via satellite were placed by bin Laden to associates in Baku regarding the strike. It looks like, to me, they could be manipulating the Foreign Fugitive Files. Is that a good guess? David, have you died laughing?
Sorry. No, you're absolutely right. The Foreign Fugitive File came into existence in 1987, and it's buried in the bowels of the United States Department of Justice. And it can be manipulated, and it's the absolute basis for man-in-the-middle attacks on the United States of America by this hypothetical group known as al-Qaeda. It can only be manipulated by the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Canada, and Interpol, and your sister and her cronies, most of them pedofeminists, I believe. So when they say that he was placed on the Federal Bureau of Investigation's 10 most wanted list, that list already existed, Phil. It existed in the Foreign Fugitive File built by your sister and Norman Inkster. So we've got cast iron evidence now that al-Qaeda was created as a partition on your sister and Norman Inkster's database, and they're using my birthday as a cover, and they're going to pay for that big time, as a cover to attack and kill people around the world. And I love Kenya. They're very nice people, as I'm sure lots of countries are full of them. It's full of color and life and music. And that verminous incumbent in your White House, he went out there in 2007 to lobby for his cousin Odinga and establish, I believe, these 6s and 7s teams ready for the election at the end of 2007 that resulted in 2008, and this is just a for instance, where the teams took some women and children in, I think it's called Ebocha. They took refuge in a church, a Christian church, and then they set fire to the church. And this wasn't obviously on my birthday. And the women and the children tried to escape through the windows. They shot at them with bows and arrows and then threw them back into the church to be burnt to death with the church. So it's not taking the Lord's name in vain, it's taking my name in vain, and that's two very separate issues, and it's not to be personalized. But anyway, I'm cross, so I think we should solve this problem as fast as possible. Over to you, Phil.
David, you're cross. Have you had regular bowel movements?
My mother always said that she'd had, and she was a nurse, that I had some of the finest bowel movements as a child she'd ever seen. So I'm still in pretty good shape in that regard. How about you?
Oh, excellent. I just don't see why you get cross all the time. There's a cliche down here in the south of the 49th parallel, don't get mad, get even. So I don't think it benefits any of us to get mad or get cross. So I think what you need to do is have some chamomile tea and figure out how to start Googling them to death. Way back when I used to fly those airplanes around, the fast moving ones that shot things, um, one of our offhand comments was I was gunning his brains out. Well, um, isn't it funny? It used to take a lot of effort and a lot of equipment. I used to have to get sweaty to gun someone's brains out with an airplane. But I think we can Google someone's brains out while we're in our bathrobes, and I think we're going to do that. In fact, a good example is watch how fast somebody in the chat room Googles this. Norman Inkster plus Interpol plus RCMP plus Foreign Fugitive File plus Marcy. I don't even think we have to write chapters anymore. I think we can write Google baits. And let me just see who's in the chat room, David, because I haven't been paying attention today because I've been trying to figure out where New London, Wisconsin is, because speaking of churches burning, they had a church get hit by a tornado yesterday, and it's some toothpicks today in New London, which I think is over on the east end of Wisconsin, north of Milwaukee. But our resident Wisconsin expert, who is named Bucky Badger, unless we have to go to DEF CON 2 or DEF CON 1, in which case he's Barry M. Hall, which sounds a lot like Barry M. Hall. And I think we should dig a big hole with a tracked excavator and dig a great big hole, because we certainly would not be able to process all the deserving people on the new gallows on Old Gallows Road. And that would start with some of the belligerent bovines. Belligerent bovine is sort of a French spinoff of militant, radical, man-hating, family-hating, child-hating, self-hating lesbians. The run-of-the-mill lesbians are just fine, just like run-of-the-mill gay guys. That's not according to God's standards. That's not according to my standards. But that's just according to the standards of David Cameron and the guy in the half White House. So, David, hopefully you've calmed down now and you can carry on for the rest of the hour without becoming agitated or demonstrating irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah, I'll do my best, Phil, and I think everything is fine in that department, at least for the next hour or so. So let's say the FBI, in its wisdom, placed Osama bin Laden on its 10 most wanted fugitive list, notwithstanding that the FBI senior personnel would know perfectly well there was a prior list, which was the fugitive file, the Foreign Fugitive File built by Kristine Marcy and Norman Inkster. And back then, in 1987, Norman Inkster was had a career with the RCMP that would eventually take him, I think, between 1988 or something like that to 1994. He became the 18th Commissioner of the RCMP. And in that capacity, he would have been able to manipulate the content or the population of the Department of Justice's Foreign Fugitive File. So he could remove people and add people. That is, he had the power to put the innocent into that database so that the FBI and Americans would go around chasing innocent parties, including the guy that they shot in Abbottabad. And the guilty could be infiltrated into the United States by doing, I suppose, what you would call an Operation Paperclip. Well, who in the United States today or back then would have been in a position to adjust the personnel files and bring illegal aliens into the United States to mount an attack? Field, over to you.
To add drama to this otherwise colorless conversation, give me the year again, please.
1987.
My sister.
That's right. So your frigging sister had the power as the senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service to bring in the people that were subsequently identified by Abel Danger, working in a counter-military intelligence capacity for General Henry Shelton. And that's why she and Norman Inkster had them shut down. So it's really staggering. Over to you.
Well, I'm going to finish off what I was putting in the chat room. In the chat room, I just put up the Google bait. It's Norman Inkster plus Interpol plus RCMP plus Foreign Fugitive File plus Marcy, and up pops, that's where I cut it off because you interrupted me, because usually I get about 4 sentences per light year, and today you're making me talk way too much. I'll have to get some type of a spray vessel to keep my larynx lubricated. Speaking of lubricating things, you're going to love chapter 25, which is the last chapter of our 11th book, because I found a lovely picture of Inkster in his RCMP uniform. And he's not a dead ringer for Peter Sellers, but it looks like whoever made him up for the photo had Peter Sellers in mind. So I don't know what got into me, but under his picture, rather than say Norman David Inkster, I put Pierre Pink Sphincter Clouseau of the French Charité, and I'm sure that Norman Inkster is going to be shocked when he does this Google search, because you'd think with everyone that knows Norman Inkster and Interpol and RCMP, Foreign Fugitive File, and Marcy, that more than 5 returns would come up when those search terms are Googled ensemble, as the French would say. But no, there's only 5 things that come up, and all 5 of them say Abel Danger. So I think Abel Danger, by today's Friday, I'd say by sundown today, Friday, we're going to be on his least popular list. And you know what? I got a message for Norman in French. Kiss my rosy red rectum, Froggy. David, over to you.
Well, I think that's fair enough, and I do love the fact that the name Inkster is intimately associated with one of the few weapons, I presume, apart from a tendril that might be put around your throat, that an octopus has to defend itself. And as I understand it, Field, you probably know more about it than I do, they squirt this black ink into the eyes of the predators, and then they swivel off into a crack in the rocks. Isn't that right?
I'd say they swish off. You know, maybe a squid would swivel, but these octopus, octopi is the plural of octopus, and I'm the chief writer and the chief defendant of our fiction, and I can go on a limb and tell you I've got 50 or 60% of chapter 25 done, and things aren't looking good for the octopus. But in the last chapter that went up whatever day that was, and today's Friday, so maybe that chapter went up Tuesday or Wednesday night, I don't recall. But I claimed that we had, and I don't know if Craig's here, and I'll bet he's not, because he's been sleepy, because I think he works on the wrong side of the clock occasionally. Nope, he's not here. But it doesn't matter. He's already earned his stripes for the day, because he made a great image for me. Our package is down in Atlanta, meaning our doppelgangers. Of course, you're in Vancouver area, and I'm sitting here in Plum City, also known as the global epicenter for real-time intelligence. But our doppelgangers are down there in Atlanta, and they're having quite a time, because the group, the gospel quartet that did a lot of singing, and they were really dominant in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and that group is called the Statler Brothers, and their name was not Statler, their name was Reed, R-E-I-D. But when it came time to name themselves, they took a look at a box of Kleenex. Actually, it wasn't Kleenex, and I don't like this word. There's certain words I don't like. I think it's called a hang-up. One of the words I do not like is T-I-S-S-U-E. And so I won't say that word, but the brand that they had in their hotel room was Statler, T-I-S-S-U-E. Okay, I can say it.
Paper handkerchief.
What's that?
Paper handkerchief.
Yeah, he saved me. I was about ready to say tissue, but he said, don't bother, paper handkerchiefs. So if you wonder who the voice from Offset is, it's Pastor Clyde Holt, which reminds me, David, Guess what's going to happen either today or Monday or Wednesday? In fact, don't guess because you couldn't guess. When you and I are done, I'm gonna upload you and I, then I'm gonna open up a short one, and Clyde and I are gonna go change gears and do something of a spiritual nature after at least one show a week, I think. And if it blossoms into something better, more power to it. And that doesn't mean that either myself or Clyde or you can't handle all this negativity all the time, because we can handle it. We've been called not only to handle it, but defeat it. And defeat it we will. And we can use any tools we want. And if someone were to look in the last chapter of Mark, is that 16 or 12? Can you remember?
16.
Yeah. In the last chapter of Mark, which is 16, it tells us what we who are called by his name can do, and we have dominion over 5 sets of antagonists. And I won't get into that because maybe that's what we'll talk about the first time we do our 15 or 20-minute Christian scripture show. I'm hoping that the first thing we talk about is Romans 28 to 30. But David, after you and I are done today, if Clyde's up to it, we might do something today or we might start on Monday. But that's something that any of the able danger people that want to hone their skills when it comes to scripture, we have a world-class teacher whose phone's ringing right now, just to show you he's also high-tech. He doesn't have one of those phones on the wall like BR549 with a party line, and then the lady who squints when she's listening to your phone call. No, he's got one of those handy things that goes off every once in a while. I have one too. But anyway, David, I was digressing there, but at least I wasn't pontificating. But I think we can defeat these people with Google baits, and if we have to write some fiction to go along with them, that's my pleasure. Over to you, David.
Yes, thanks, Phil. So I put up a bit about Norman David Inkster. So he's born on August the 19th, 1938. So he's a Leo. He was born 5 years before I was. And he served as the 18th Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police from September the 1st, 1987 to June the 24th, 1994. So he became that enormously powerful position to manipulate the American Department of Justice Foreign Fugitive File in 1987. Because if you Google the Foreign Fugitive File, you find out that there's only 2 parties or 2 entities entitled to move or remove or add names into that file. One is the RCMP and the other is Interpol. So from 1992 until 1994, he also served as president of Interpol. And that word also is very important because remember, Phil, 1992, some interesting things happened. One is that these people, your sister and Norman Inkster and their agents, tried to kill George Bush Sr. with a briefcase bomb in Kuwait that had atomized aluminum powder in it. And the reason for atomized aluminum powder is that's an accelerant, it's incendiary material, and it's oxidized with stuff like ammonium perchlorate, and it creates a temperature half the surface of the sun, i.e. 5,800 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you want to kill someone with explosive, you want to mix in enough material to vaporize the evidence that would otherwise put them on death row. So I'm quite sure that your sister is not an expert in explosives, but she would understand the logic of that because she's been in the business ever since she joined the administration of sheltering the guilty and accusing the innocent. Now, our friend Norman Inkster might know something about explosives, but I look at this guy, you know what, Phil? He's not front line. He's not A team. I doubt if he's even B team. He raised blandness to a fine art. He's one of these guys who's essentially the ultimate camouflage bureaucrat. And it was the ultimate camouflage bureaucrat that sent millions of people into the concentration camps in the Second World War. And we should not forget that concentration camps were probably invented by the Brits in the War of Independence, certainly polished up to a very fine art during the Boer War in South Africa. And by the time the Second World War came around, with King Edward VIII, who by then had abdicated, visiting Hitler, he actually went on a Go ahead.
That's not me.
Oh, was Clyde asking a question?
No, something in your end of the world. We're quiet here.
Okay. All right. So let's carry on with this guy. Born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, but spending nearly all his early life years in Broadview, Saskatchewan, where his father, Harold, was a master mechanic, During his studies at the University of New Brunswick, where he did sociology and psychology, he was continuously employed in the Human Resources Department of the RCMP. In 1961, he married Mary Ann Morrison. So if he was born in 38, by the time they shot Kennedy, that's 25 years old. Perfectly capable for a double agent, ostensibly working in the RCMP to put together a strategy of sixes and sevens based on an alliance with the livery companies in London to engineer the assassination of JFK in such a manner that suspicion would or could be directed all over the place and away from the organizers of the hit. So let me just back up now to this idea of sixes and sevens as I see it today, Phil. The Worshipful Company of Skinners, with a hall at Dowtown in the City of London, and the Worshipful Company of Merchant Tailors alternate in the Lord Mayor's procession between 6 and 7 by way of precedence. Both of them are members of the great livery companies, the 12 great livery companies. And so you and I have already discussed, I believe, why Book 12 might be quite symbolic. There are 12 disciples, if I understand correctly. There's 12 months of the year. There's 12 great livery companies in order of precedence.
How many people in a grand jury?
And there's actually, in a grand jury, there's 23. In a little jury, or what they call a petit jury, there's 12, Phil.
Okay, and how many donuts are in a baker's dozen?
13.
I just wanted to make sure you were thinking clearly.
And there's probably, maybe someone could Google that, a worshipful company of bakers. Now, back in the 14th century, the day on which both livery companies received their letters patent from the Crown was the same day. I forget what exactly that day was. Maybe someone could check it. I think it was around, anyway, I think the year was 1347. Either way, very, very ancient. But because they received it on the same day, they started arguing about where they were in the Lord's Mayor procession, either 6 or 7. And these processions included actually barges, gilded, extremely valuable physical assets, rowing along the Thames, and they had water fights that resulted in the death of a significant number of members of both livery companies. So they needed a solution. And the Lord Mayor, I believe, in the 15th century, had a brilliant solution on first blush, but perhaps a very dangerous one. He said on the feast of Corpus Christi, the company that had been 6th would become 7th, and the company that had been 7th would be 6th. And my guess is, Phil, from then on, if not from the century before, those two livery companies in the City of London orchestrated all of the major assassinations and civil wars, St. Bartholomew's Days massacre, including right up to the Days of Rage in Chicago, the First World War, the Second World War, the attack on Pearl Harbor, and 9/11, on the basis they could get away with it if each livery company had 2 very specific functions. The first one was to do the hit at the lower part of the spread, and they were betting back in that century, and then remove evidence of the hit of the other party doing that time at the top part of the spread, and they conversely removed evidence from both parties. So you have this sixes and sevens, this English phrase, sixes and sevens at crime scenes, that look exactly what happened in Dealey Plaza with JFK. So here's a theory. The Skinners put together a sniper team to take out JFK as he entered the box in that road in Dealey Plaza, earmarked by the stripes in the road. And the box was about 22 yards long.
That's a cricket pitch, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. 66 feet. That's the age of your sister this year, right?
Yeah, she's probably 66 feet around, judging from the picture we had of her in chapter 23, but I digress.
She's putting on weight, is she?
Oh, I don't know in reality. In fiction, she is. In fact, in fiction, we're going to put a weight like cinder blocks in a cheesecloth sack, wrap it around her ankles, and throw her in the river. Now, of course, as a loving brother, I'd never do that to my sister unless given an opportunity. I think she has a lot to answer for. Number one, she's violated 2 of the 5 commandments, those being honor your mother and father. She's dishonored my mother and my father greatly. Also, we're not to bear false witness against our neighbor. She and her ilk have borne vast false witness against the Muslims, calling them radical Islamists, calling them al-Qaeda, calling them the Mujahideen or the Taliban. Why don't you just call them people that are getting picked on by the bankers needlessly? That's what I'd call them. It's a lot easier to pronounce. You don't have to be Arabic. You don't have to be a faggy French guy. You can just speak the Queen's English and say that my sister, Al Haig, Inkster, Stinkster, the Master Sphinxter, and all these other people that are little bitty tentacles of the octopus. And keep in mind, David, on each octopus tentacles, there's approximately 78 what?
On each octopus, there are 8 tendrils.
No, I said on each of the tentacles, there's 8 tentacles, and each of those has approximately 78 what?
Suckers.
Yeah, exactly. The people I just rattled off, Alexander Haig, these people suck. S-U-C-K. Now, I can come up with a really good anagram for that, or maybe it's a monogram or a mammogram. Who really gives a rat's rear? But these people are suckers in 3 different ways. They try to suck the lifeblood, the energy, the health, and the wealth out of global citizens. They try to sucker other people into joining their merry band of misfits, promising them vast wealth. Well, now here it is. Abel Danger's been taking them off their timing since 1993, most notably in 2000 when we shut down the Y2K, and in 2001 when the United 93 was delayed by 41 minutes. If United 93 had struck the Capitol shortly after whatever it was not American 77 that struck the Pentagon, I don't think we'd be having this conversation, David, because see, the people over in England who've given up their land, and I don't think it's the English population or even the British population, but it is the people that are running England and Britain into the ground. I think all along in the back of their mind, they realized they were going to be run out of their own countries by the Muslims, simply because the Muslims procreate at the rate of 7 offspring per couple, and the lily white snobs in France, Amsterdam, Spain, Italy, Greece, Portugal, Germany, I'm forgetting one, United Kingdom, they produce 1.9 or 1.8 kids per couple, which means over time, if any of those countries are democracies, and I don't know if any of them are, I really don't care, whatever their problems are over there from Germany to the UK, that's your problem. Don't bring it over here. And don't think you're going to crawl into the United States like a bunch of hermit crabs and do that after you've eliminated all of us. We're more than capable. We're more than able. There's a great church song, He is able, more than able. And we're more than able to rebuff any attack. And if you think I'm bluffing, maybe I am. Maybe you better check Isaiah 54:17 before you grab your, what is that thing the jostlers have? Those great big sticks. If there's an English guy with a full dress of mail and he's riding a horse and he's got all sorts of colorful things and he's got one of these great big poles, it's not going to do really well against an AR-15. And I've got an AR-15. You ought to hear it when it's on the full auto mode. It's not supposed to be, but somehow it happens that way. Today in the news, the front page today is a jailer, which is a sheriff's deputy, was murdered in his own yard. He was working on his car. It was an assassination. So the sheriff, known as Joe Arpaio, just passed out 400 AR-15s to every deputy in Maricopa County. Maybe that's what Janet Napolitano should do, is whenever a good guy is killed, you arm the rest of the good guys to the teeth. But that's not the way that Janet Napolitano, let's see, what is that? There's a really good expression. Oh yeah, that's not the way Janet Napolitano rolled. Well, and I'm not making reference to her obesity or all that blubber that drapes and layers over her IOC, yuck. But she was just a role player, and I got to give her credit. She was smart enough to cut the cord when she kept seeing the same Google search over and over of Napolitano plus DHS plus DMORT 5 plus HSEEP plus crisis actors plus vision box plus a surname that was randomly taken from a Philadelphia phone book, McConnell. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Field, and thank you for that wonderful picture of the Pink Panther. This is
David,
Peter Sellers.
David,
go ahead.
It's the pink sphincter.
Yeah, pink sphincter. And I think maybe you better introduce a new worshipful company, Field, the Worshipful Company of Suckers. How about that?
Yeah, it'd be good because there's 78 suckers on every tentacle. 2 times 78 is 156. So in the last chapter that went up, we had shot 2 tentacles, those tentacles being G4S and Serco. And I really think that if we can continue to attack Serco, the other tentacles all atrophy and fall off, just like somebody with phony syndrome. Back to you, David.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point you make about Serco, which has custody of the National Physical Laboratory cesium fountain clock. And by offering super accurate timing signals to Team 6 and disrupting the timing signal going to Team 7, they can drive the body count down towards the bottom of the spread. And remember, the body count has to be within the spread, or the team that is doing the killing gets killed. That I think is the discipline that probably dates back to the 14th century, Phil, because this secret, it's so profound, it's so deep, they cannot afford it to be exposed. Regrettably for them, we've exposed it. And one of the issues, of course, that's always fascinated me, and we've been wrestling with that for a long time, is where is the physical headquarters of the virtual floating matrix? And that phrase was coined by the RCMP. As far as I can remember, it was coincident with the period when Guillermo Zaccardelli was commissioner of the RCMP around the year 2000. My guess is the good people in the RCMP, and I'm sure there are many good people, sensed that their internal chain of command had been compromised. What many of them would not have realized was that it was Norman Inkster who did the compromising when he became the 18th Commissioner of the RCMP in 1987, when he was told or realized that by getting inside the pants, if that's the right word, of the various pedophile feminists in the United States Department of Justice, including, I believe, your sister, he could set up a database within the Department of Justice to identify the innocent that could be framed for attacks whilst the guilty went free. So the Foreign Fugitive File was set up in the Department of Justice by your sister and structured in such a way that Norman Inkster could populate it with innocent Muslims, for example. And the guilty could be monitored in a partition in that database. So legitimate people, and of course there are many in the FBI and the Department of Justice, when they put in a query to search that database, they only found the innocent, albeit described as fugitives, and they never found the guilty. So I think Robert Hansen was probably played a significant role. Remember, Phil, Robert Hansen was your sister's protege in the senior executive service. He was promoted to senior executive service in December of 2000, and I believe he went into jail in March of 2001, where he became part of the resource at Supermax used for the 6 and 7 attacks of 9/11. But I digress. Going back to the Skinner's Hall in London, in the city, which goes back to the 14th century. It's a medieval hall, incredibly ancient building. In 1987, the Worshipful Company of Management Consultants started its reign or run to become a livery company by forming a guild. And the place where they met, and I believe conspired for the attack subsequent to 1987, which includes the bombing of Pan Am 103, was the Skinner's Hall. And back then, there was a woman who was an up-and-coming, and I believe she ended up as the senior economist at KPMG, and her name is Vicky Hune. You remember that, Phil?
Yeah, VickHune. Wasn't she English?
She was English, but she was born in Greece. And if you look her up in Wikipedia, it's fascinating. She was born in Greece, but there's no mention of who her parents were. And she comes to the United Kingdom, I think around the age of 17, 52, 62, 69, but she's a dead ringer for Prince Philip.
Yes, I was going to tell you that he impregnated a young girl, like 17-year-old girl in Greece when he was on holiday from his consort. And if the guy had any testosterone and any shoe leather, he would have taken a hike about 50 years ago. But maybe he likes being a consort. Back to you, David.
Well, I think he probably inseminated an underage child.
That's what I said.
Oh, did you?
I said 17. And 17 is underage.
Is that under the age of consent in the United States?
I believe so. Let me ask a person who knows more than me. Isn't it statutory rape if they're under 18?
I don't know if there's a federal statute. The states vary. Some are 16.
Yep.
In the South, you get some that get lower, 15.
Yeah, in Arkansas, it doesn't matter. In fact, in Arkansas, foreplay consists of this. Get in the truck, sis. But anyway, we don't know the answer to your question, but we don't have to worry about all these details. Watch how fast we get input from the chat room above and below the 49th parallel as it pertains to the age of consent. But I'll tell you, I have 4 daughters, and I don't consent, and I've got a shotgun. And I told my oldest daughter when she got old enough to think about going out with boys, I said, if anybody comes over here to our farm to get you, I'll be at the end of the driveway with a 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun draped over my left forearm, and dangling from my left hand will be a 6-pack of beer with 3 missing. And what I will say to your dates as they drive in is, have her back by 9 o'clock, son, or you'll be wearing your testicles for earrings. David, we can't leave this up to young girls. I mean, they can be overpowered with stuff none of us understand. But anyway, let's put that out. What's the statutory age around North America?
For the FBI, isn't it 16?
I'll find out. I'll find out about the FBI. David, over to you. I'm going to find something.
Okay, now let's assume or hypothesize that Prince Philip inseminated an underage girl in Greece, and the underage girl gave birth. Maybe she was quite highly born. Maybe she was, I don't know, the daughter of the king of Greece or whatever. Remember, this fellow is part of the Greek aristocracy and so on, and I think his sisters were all pro-Hitler. Anyway, let's assume that he's impregnated an underage, well-known daughter of a well-known family. The child is born, and everyone knows that Prince Philip is the father. What to do? Well, she needed to find a new identity or a new place where she could be under the watchful eye of His Royal Highness, Her Royal Highness, His Royal Highness Prince Philip, and have a career that would lead her to a position of influence where she could help add to the power of the people who controlled Prince Philip, because Prince Philip doesn't control Prince Philip. The City of London livery companies control Prince Philip. For instance, the Grand Master of the Guild of Air Pilots and Air Navigators that provided the skilled personnel to execute the stand down of the United States Air Force and the destruction of key strategic targets in the United States was Prince Philip from 1953 to 2003, an incredible span of 50 years. And the Guild of Air Pilots and Air Navigators, I think, was started in 1927 or 28, maybe someone could check that. And that was the year when the United Kingdom joined Interpol. And that was the period of the Weimar Republic, when inflation was raging. There was a breakdown of family values associated with the German word Lustmord, which meant that people would sell victims to be killed up on the stage in a theater in front of an audience that would pay to see them being killed. And they would be attacked sexually, and this was, I suppose, the forerunner of the kinds of snuff films that were made out at the pig farm in British Columbia. But it's very clear to me that that was staged by the British propaganda arm that we now recognize as the BBC. Anyway, back to Vicky Huni, or Vicky Price. I think that was from her first marriage, and then she married Nick Huni. So she was at one time an economist with Exxon, I think a few years before the crash of the Exxon Valdez on the rocks, which was a staged maneuver to produce a huge insurance profit. And then around the period that she joined KPMG, KPMG links up with the worshipful company of Skinners and applies to become a livery company. That means that KPMG, the world's leading management consultant, which is also a racketeering, influenced and corrupt organization that had to pay $456 million to your sister's Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund to avoid its partners going to jail for life, was linked with the Skinners as early as 1987. But the Skinners, in their medieval hall in the City of London, have hundreds of years of experience with the worshipful company of merchant tailors in putting a crime scene at 6s and 7s. So Vicky Huni joins KPMG around that period. She goes on to become the senior economist at KPMG, and in 2010, she becomes the master, the first female master of the worshipful company of management consultants that meets at the Skinners Hall 5 or 6 times, Field. They meet at the Skinners Hall 6 or 7 times a year. So what is going on at Skinner's Hall? I suggest to you the conspiracy associated with taking a crime scene where a murder has taken place and adjusting the evidence, planting and removal of evidence, such that the guilty are sheltered and the innocent are accused. Where do we see evidence of that? Well, it's all over the place in association with 911 because, for example, United 93, outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania, a 100-ton plane is vaporized into debris where the residuals are not enough to fill half a dumpster. The body bits are collected by DMORT, and I don't remember what DMORT it was.
DMORT 5.
The body bits that, but it was DMORT 5, was it?
Where? Sandy Hook?
No, at United 93.
Oh, I think that was DMORT 5. I'll find out.
Okay, well, what DMORT does, Disaster Mortuary Operational Response Team, I think they're called, created by Obama in Chicago, is they arrive at a crime scene as part of the 6s and 7s conspiracy. And their objective is not to collect body bits so that a coroner can determine the cause of death. Their job is to arrive at the crime scene before a detective can look at the evidence, collect up the bits, do DNA, orthodontic, and various other kinds of checks, sort the body bits into belonging to the same individual, put them in a plastic bag, and send them to the grieving families, a bit like, as I understand it, the Chinese People's Liberation Army send the family of someone who's been executed the bullet which executed them, and then bills the family for the bullet. Oh, that's a marvelous picture of the Skinner's Hall, Bucky. Great stuff. And that's the outside. Obviously, that's more modern, but I believe the hall or elements of it go back to the 14th century. So this is just extraordinary that we are traversing the centuries field and finding a model of murder for hire that connects to the modern day. Now, can we relate it to the attack on the Kenyatta Airport, International Airport in Nairobi, on my birthday? Damn them. Well, the story that comes out is that the group of vendors who were selling duty-free goods had been shut down by the authorities because they were flouting some law, and probably this was a revenge attack. I mean, that's one of the theories, by disgruntled vendors. And I have to say, it is heartbreaking to see the way these people are treated. I remember driving in Lagos. No, it was in Port Harcourt in Nigeria, and they wanted to drive a highway through an area occupied by a shamba or a village of shanty houses, etc. So I don't know how much warning they gave, but they switched on the bulldozers and they just flattened the houses. And there were women and children crying in the streets, and I had to drive along it, and it really teared at my heart. And where's the guilt? Where's the innocent? But this is the big machine. And it was an Italian company that had the contract for building the highway. They shortchanged the Nigerian authorities. Instead of putting in 6 inches foundation, I think they put in a couple of inches foundation for these highways. And as soon as the monsoons came along, they all washed away. So it was just
Point of order. Point of order.
Go ahead.
Okay, they contracted for 6 inches. They delivered 2 inches. How many inches did they bill?
I think they built 6 or maybe even a dozen.
Yeah, I just want to let people know how this works in case they're new to this. Over to you, David. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no sweat. So that's a lecture at the Skinner's Hall, I presume. Apparently it's got the bell taken from the Empress of Russia, if that makes any sense, of 1190. So you got a tradition there that's just extraordinarily ancient, based on contract killing. Now, what do I mean by contract killing? Well, the Skinners, they go out and have been doing since the 14th century, and nothing wrong with that. They kill animals and they skin them and they turn it into wonderful leather goods of the kind that wraps around those Smythson passports, designed by Sam Cam Wham Bam, thank you ma'am. And of course, they're very used to being in a community that kills animals. And I suppose most of those animals are four-legged. But why wouldn't the kind of people who go out and kill four-legged creatures be very readily attached or attracted to the idea of going out and killing two-legged? After all, a witness said that she saw Willie Picton at the Picton Pig Farm skinning a prostitute, hanging up on a hook. Sorry about that sounding rather unpleasant, but that's what life is in the fast lane. So the Skinners and the merchant tailors would perhaps be challenged on Christmas Day of 1996 to see if they could pull off a murder of a little girl, daughter of an extremely important person from the point of view of the attack of 9/11, on Christmas Day and get away with it. What needed to be done? Well, let's assume KPMG partner in forensics, Norman Inkster, who's the former commissioner of the RCMP, he would know exactly what kind of people in Canada would be interested in the torture, rape, and murder of a 7-year-old American girl. After all, he would be aware of the Scarborough rapes, for example, at the University of Toronto, which apparently took place with at least 4 people involved. Paul Bernardo, Russell Williams, and their girlfriends at the time, to take the photographs. Because Russell Williams and Paul Bernardo were drinking buddies at the University of Toronto during the period of the Scarborough rapes. In May of 1991, they attended each other's weddings. Paul Bernardo marrying Carla Homolka, and Russell Williams marrying Mary Elizabeth Harriman. Our friend Paul Bernardo works for PricewaterhouseCoopers, which would be a management consultant principal, or principals would meet on a regular basis, 6 or 7 times a year.
Hang on, David, hang on.
Go ahead.
How many times a year did they meet?
6 or 7 times, according to Wikipedia.
Okay, say it one more time.
6 or 7 times, yeah, I know.
Yeah, 6s and 7s. Okay, I just want you to know I was listening.
Well, maybe it's worth someone just checking that I haven't misremembered, but if they Google Worshipful Company of Management Consultants, Wikipedia, and check, that says they meet at Skinner's Hall 6 or 7 times a year. Well, the Skinner's, of course, is associated with 6s and 7s at the crime scene. So what I'm trying to do is establish is there evidence of a 6s and 7s treatment of the crime scene that we associate with the torture, rape, and murder of little John Benet Ramsey on Christmas Day? And is there a kind of obsession with timing that might suggest they had some spot fixing and spread betting going on? Well, there's one layer of complexity associated with the killing of John Benet Ramsey, is that it coincided with the NORAD Center exercise put on out of Cheyenne Mountain by Canadian and American forces responsible for the early warning systems that used to be called the dew line. Can you just comment on the dew line, Field? We'll hop around a little bit here.
Oh, goody. I love it when we hop around. The dew line was a distant early warning line, and it was a string of U.S. operated radar stations up in the northern part of Canada. The idea being back in the 50s and 60s that if the Russians were going to attack the United States of America, the shortest direction or the shortest route is over the pole. And so to give the United States maximum warning, they moved their radars as far north as they could. And that was called the dew line. And then they had SAGE for communications, which is semi-automatic ground environment, or SAGE. And then as technology improved, they could bring the radars further and further south. And towards the end of all this madness being that we should fear Russia or Russia should fear us, both the Russian people and the American people should fear their governments. Probably more so in our country. Putin seems to be on a roll lately. He's rolling all over the half White House inhabitant who seems to be confused as his surname, which could be Ubaid, which means hairy camel trader, which probably explains a lot how he came in possession of Sasquatch. He probably didn't realize, maybe in his innocence or ignorance, he thought that was a hairy camel, and he'd certainly be half right. But back in the 50s and 60s, when we were terrified that the Russians were going to attack, to give us maximum warning, and that was so all the people could crawl into their shelters and all of the SAC assets could launch north. And because if we had incoming bombers, then we would have launched SAC. And all the SAC bases would have launched over the pole responses. That's why so many of the SAC bases are along the northern tier of states. I'm starting from west to east, and the furthest west SAC base that I'm aware of is Fairchild at Spokane, Washington, and see, they could go directly over the pole and hit that end of Russia. Further east, I know that if Ginger Cookie's here, she thinks I'm going to say Bangor, Maine, or Loring or Dow, which are Loring and Dow were the two SAC bases in Maine. So just to keep Ginger on our team, I'll say that they're the furthest east. But now that she's laughing and telling her office staff that she finally got mentioned with something important, like which is the SAC base that's the furthest east, actually, I think Thule, Greenland, and Goose Bay, Labrador are further east, and if they had time to respond, in other words, if the Strategic Air Command sensed that in 2 or 3 days the Russians might be launching a wave at us, they would have taken a lot of the southern SAC assets, say like from MacDill Air Force Base or McCoy Air Force Base in Florida, and they would have pre-deployed about half of their assets up to foreign base, northern bases like Thule, Greenland, and Goose Bay, and Bangor, and Dow, and Westover, and Wordsmith, and Kincheloe, and K.I. Sawyer. I just was redundant there somehow. Kincheloe, no, I wasn't. Kincheloe is its own base. K.I. Sawyer, there's a bunch of them in Michigan there. But we used to have a big Air Force. We don't anymore because it's too expensive. And the people that are trying to bleed America and bleed England and prosper, at least the French, I don't know why they'd want to do that, and the Germans, and I understand fully why they'd want to do that. And you just have to understand the pedigree of Merkel. And I didn't say Merkin, get your mind out of the gutter. I said Merkel, M-E-R-K-E-L. And then the Fardingham guy, you know, he looks like he may be Greece. I don't think so. I think he's a German. And I think his consort's also a German. But that's up for the people in the United Kingdom to figure out how long they want to reside under her thumb, which brings up the picture I'm trying to find right now, which is Kate Middleton in a yellow dress on a windy day at the Edmonton Airport, and I'm searching for Kate's bum, and I'm not talking about the prince she's married to. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Field. And the major or principal contractor for the construction of the dew line in Canada was AMEC. And as that's a great analysis or summary you did there, Phil, as that early warning radar improved, they kind of retreated or brought the center of the technology back from the north, and correct me if I'm wrong, and they shoved it into Cheyenne Mountain. So Cheyenne Mountain became the eyes and ears of the North American defense establishment in lieu of those distant early warning stations. But of course, the people, the technologists who would have installed the distant early warning systems, that gave them a free pass into Cheyenne Mountain, which interestingly is the center for the StarNet command, Stargate command, where the post-production coordinator was Deborah Furlong, who got whacked in Ireland 2 or 3 days before the Boston bombing at the Marathon. But back to little John Benet Ramsey and an attempt by yours truly to prove that the crime scene there was treated as a target for 6s and 7s spoliation by the worshipful company of Skinners and the worshipful company of merchant tailors. The evidence at the crime scene that allowed the judge, whose name I forget, to preclude or exclude the family as suspects included a beaver hair. Now, whether it's 1 beaver hair or 2 beaver hairs, I don't know. But the beaver hair would be a characteristic piece of evidence attached to, for example, the Yukon hat, which is part of the winter uniform of the RCMP. And it's made sometimes out of muskrat, sometimes out of raccoon, and sometimes out of beaver. So I visualize the Russell Williams, Paul Bernardo, Mary Elizabeth Harriman, Carla Homolka folks, some in jail, some not, being invited to participate in a NORAD Santa trip down to Boulder, Colorado. After all, Russell Williams flies planes in the VIP fleet in Canada and has flown Prince Philip and the Queen and various cabinet ministers and all and sundry around. And remember, he's behind bars for a double homicide, and he's also a pedophile psychopath whose uniforms were burnt on the orders of the Governor General of Canada, David Johnston, presumably because, not 100%, the DNA found on the child's body and clothing in Boulder, Colorado, matches Russell Williams or one of his passengers that flew down on that NORAD Santa day, or 48 hours or 72 hours, whatever, and perhaps dressed in a fetish uniform as a winter Mountie to be filmed raping the little girl. And I don't know how many beavers there are in Boulder, Colorado field, but somehow I don't think there's a lot. But do you know anything about beavers in Colorado? Over to you.
I'm regarded as an expert globally, but I would say, hey, David, this is serious. Let's not be laughing. Somebody might think we're not serious. I'm dead serious. Something just struck me when you said that. You said somebody getting a photo of a Mountie abusing a child. Do you know how I interpret that?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
A Canadian subjugating an American, and that makes me get real engaged. And so I can't wait to write about that in chapter 25, that in fact, see, these people are not only hopeless, they're helpless, because if I put in chapter 25 that they shot videotape of a guy in a Mountie uniform or a Royal Canadian Air Force, they don't call it that anymore, they call it the chicken shit Air Force, But if you got some wimp queer like Russell Williams in a military flight suit appearing to abuse John Benet Ramsey, I would take that as an attack upon America. And we already covered the RAP issue and the statutory ages. And by the way, I posted the ages across the 50 states, and I directed everybody to take a look at Alabama. And if anybody's got a lower age than Alabama, I hope that's not right. But Alabama is really out of control on their rape age. But I don't think it's a matter of age. I think that there's some people in our chat room right now that are probably in their 50s or 60s, and I don't think they should be abused by men either. You get my drift, David? I'm avoiding the R word.
Yes, Fielden, I sense there was a rage building in you, but as you point out to me and as I point out to you, and we both understand, vengeance is a dish best taken cold, but it's still the holy grail for me to find a story that is sufficiently compelling to wake up the giant, which is America.
I think we've got it.
And so that image that you conjured up there of a male, could possibly be a female, Mountie, with a winter hat raping the little white girl as part of a concerted exercise to humiliate and ridicule Americans. I think that's a very powerful image, and if that helps to wake up America, then it's not for me to say, but I think God would bless that as an image, but certainly that little girl. Phil, can you just take over and I'll just answer that?
Yeah, you answer the phone. I thought you were going to ask me to answer the phone. CCW just put up some pictures of some F-106s, and the first one you put up was the 5th Fighter Interceptor Squadron from Minot Air Force Base, and I used to fly against them all the time when they had F-106s. I think someone can check. I think they lost their 106s in 82 or 83, and they were replaced by F-15s. And when the Air Force gave up the F-15s at Minot, if North Dakota had clear-thinking politicians and a military guy with backbone, which they had neither, they had wimps in Washington. You want to hear some wimpish names? Kent Conrad, Byron Dorgan, Earl Pomeroy, and they let Teddy Kennedy beat them up. And those F-15s, which should have come to Fargo's Air National Guard unit, which was then and always had been considered number 1 and 2 categories, flying and partying, and they don't have much to party about because Massachusetts got the F-15s, and then there are some other poor leadership miscues, and I'm not going to mention the name of the guy who did it because I know he feels terrible, and he should feel terrible. He just doesn't need to be identified and further humiliated. But somebody who got into he wanted to match wits with the Pentagon, and he went into that wits fight on the short end of the wits index. And so when he was putting his foot down to get enhanced F-16s for Fargo, he ended up with a bunch of propeller airplanes, which have already been canceled, and a bunch of drones. And I think we can get the drones canceled because drones simply are the privatization of war. What I mean by that is these pictures that CCW is putting up of that, the F-106s or the Delta winged airplanes, those things had a pilot. The pilot had eyeballs. The pilot had codes to launch weapons. The pilot was by himself in that single seat airplane. But all those pilots had the authority to launch lethal force if they thought it was necessary. And now the people like Kristine Marcy, Courtney Banks, Hillary Clinton, Sasquatch, whatever her name is, that erect primate that's hanging around eating donuts and Twinkies. I find it interesting that she was so concerned with the obesity of children that, first of all, she forced Chicago's Hostess Baking Company to stop making Twinkies, which was really stupid, Michelle, because you, Michelle Obama, ordered the entire last day production of Twinkies to come into Chicago. What a hypocrite. In fact, If I weren't such a gentleman, I'd say, what a fat, ugly hypocrite. But unfortunately, I'm a gentleman. I can't speak like that. So if anybody thinks they heard that, obviously there's some type of a skip off the ionosphere. David, are you back from that gripping phone call? David's not back from the phone call.
Yeah, I am.
Oh, you always have to correct me, don't you?
No.
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Over to you.
Okay, so we got the beaver hair at the crime scene, and the logical reaction to that would be, or should be, and I'm not a crime scene investigator, at least I'm not a professional. I mean, we've come upon this by essentially volunteering, would be to find out the DNA of the beaver population which gave rise to that particular beaver hair at that crime scene. And hypothetically, we might find that it's a trapping community in the north where people tie those kind of knots to see in the garrote around the little girl's neck. But as far as I can judge, Field, none of that crime scene investigation has been carried out by the FBI or whoever is responsible for making sure that doesn't continue to stay a cold case. So anyway, we have the hypothesis, and of course one can test that with the physical evidence, if there's a will, the hypothesis that there was a Canadian dressed with the fur of a beaver as part of a fetishist uniform involved in raping the little girl. And that would be associated with the worshipful company of Skinners in the hall at Dowtown in the City of London since the mid-14th century. Then we have the Father Christmas genre, if that's the right word, where the little girl is told before Christmas that she's going to get a visit from Father Christmas, and the little girl, John Bonet, tells her little friend, who tells her little friend's mother, that to John Bonet, that Father Christmas comes on Christmas Eve. And apparently John Bonet says, no, he's coming to see me on Christmas Day. Well, a Father Christmas robe would be historically or traditionally the kind of techniques used made by members of the worshipful company of merchant tailors. So you've got two fascinating bits of evidence, anecdotal or physical, at the crime scene that suggest to me, being a simple-minded guy, that that was a crime scene identified weeks before to be camouflaged in a NORAD center exercise to demonstrate the inability of Americans to defend their very own daughters in their very own homes on an important festival such as Christmas Day. So I think I've always said that this is a much bigger story than just, and that's a terrible word to use in this context, the rape and murder of a 7-year-old in the United States in Boulder, Colorado. For me, it was an enormously important propaganda victory for the forces of evil operating out of the City of London, that they were able to get in, dupe the little girl, perhaps into opening the door of the house, giving her a toy, what is it, Corporal Flapjack, which has got beaver hair in it, perhaps, or meeting her at the door with someone in a Father Christmas robe and a Mounties robe and a woman with a camera, shades of the Scarborough rape, and the little girl trustingly taking them downstairs to receive her next present. And I would love to think that that image, as horrible as it might be, could be conveyed to Americans as a plausible explanation of what happened on Christmas Day of 1996, when by then Norman Inkster was a forensic partner for KPMG that was working with the worshipful company of Skinners out of the Hall in London since 1987. And Field's sister and the pedophile lesbian Janet Reno, former Attorney General, and the present Amazon director in control of the Internet Movie Database, Jamie Gorelick, had 2 months before awarded themselves the Gore Hammer Prize, which apparently is a hammer with a ribbon round it, for their contribution to the lab of the FBI with the introduction of 3 technologies. Sentry, which allows people to pass customs on the Mexican-US border, as I understand it, a sort of automatic check-through for people like the Hong Kong and Shanghai bank clients carrying drugs. JABS, Joint Automated Booking System, which would be used, it would appear, to book the 6s and 7s hit teams in and out of a crime scene so that they could be timed to arrive at the right time and leave at the right time, leaving evidence in a total state of confusion. And JPATS, or Con Air, to fly people in a secret partition in the Foreign Fugitive File in and out of the country.
Your phone's ringing.
Field, I have to answer that.
Of course you do. Anyway, Bucky and Anita. Oh, did I slip and say Anita again? Of course, Anita is really the correct name for Jameskin. Anita gets real sleepy, and sometimes Jameskin gets sleepy too. That's because they're one and the same. There's a little humor going on here. Bucky and let's see, Sherlock. And we have some great photos, as you can clearly see. The picture of the 36 Studebaker and those 2 women in poodle skirts, I'll try to remember that. And then there's some question about the Mexican hats. That was myself and Agent Dwarf. Agent Dwarf, by the way, is 75 years old. I'm not making this up. He lives in the same town in Manitoba as Buddy Knox, who had Party Doll. Remember that? All I want is a party doll to come along with me when I'm feeling blue, to be ever loving something or other. Yeah, come along and be my party doll, come along and be my party doll, come along and be my party doll, and I'll redact with you. Anyway, that was pretty racy in 1956, so a lot of parents didn't appreciate them putting that out. I can't remember the name, but somebody who can Google can figure out where Buddy Knox was from. But it's on the shores of Plum Creek, Manitoba. And so when I communicate with Agent Dwarf, whose name is really Ernest, and his surname starts with a W, we always refer to ourselves as Plum South and Plum North, and we're not plum crazy, we're plum correct. Because well, how close am I to Plum Creek?
How close?
It runs right around here.
200 yards.
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to think. Dean's, it runs by. Oh, it runs right back there. So Plum Creek, isn't it? Isn't that Plum Creek that comes out of the?
No, that's the spring. Plum Creek is over.
Yeah, that's right.
In the middle of the valley.
Does the spring lead into Plum Creek?
Yeah, it dumps in down here.
Okay. Next time you guys.
Ways through town.
Yep. Yeah, I'm getting a history lesson because across from Molly's there's a duck pond. And the duck pond is a spring that runs all day long, 365 since 1857. And it empties into Plum Creek, which is a bigger body of water. But they're both very clean, and Plum Creek has trout in it. So I think this year in the Plum City Plunge, we forgot to take the tour. I can't remember if we took the tour or not. But I do know that everybody that came had fun, and we hope to do it again. So, David, if you're back, we need to figure out what time we're quitting, because today is the time we normally quit around 2 or 2:30.
Yeah, I think let's go down to the half hour, right, Phil?
Yeah, that's fine. And then I've got things to do, and so does Pastor Clyde, and so do you. And while you're doing that, I'm going to, yeah, go ahead and do what you're doing. I'm going to ask Pastor Clyde something off camera.
Okay, so we've got a theory that the Canadian RCMP and Interpol, together with the Worshipful Company of Skinners and the Worshipful Company of Merchant Tailors, deployed agents to Boulder, Colorado, to carry out a strategic rape of a little girl and demonstrate to their friends that they could, at a time of their choosing, go anywhere within the United States of America, commit a murder, an egregious murder, and get away with it, i.e. the Americans were helpless. And I would think that the people who would say initially, that's not possible, you can't do that, would be pretty impressed. So we're talking Christmas Day of 1996. So that would have emboldened the bookmakers and the people handling the bets for spread betting and spot fixing to claim that these guys could do anything. And we're talking serious money. Remember, the British Bankers Association deploys the assets of some of the biggest banks in the world. They've been running the London Interbank, what's the O stand for? The London Interbank Offer Rate, I think it is.
Overnight.
Overnight rate, thanks, Phil. Since 1984, with trillions of dollars sloshing around the world at bogus interest rates. And the money is getting parked with one of the world's most powerful management consultant firms, which is KPMG, serving as escrow. So an escrow basically takes the money on the left and puts it in the left hand, takes the money on the right, puts it in the right hand, and holds that money until some event is triggered, you know, like a little girl raped at midnight on Christmas Day, and she stops breathing and transfers the money from the left to the right or the right to the left, or if there's a prior arrangement, the major money doesn't go from the left to the right or the right to the left, but each part is sitting on the left or the right. They pay what's known as a vigorish, about 15% of the bet, to the bookmaker holding the escrow, which is KPMG, and then the KPMG people pay the hit team, the red team and the blue team, depending on how precise they have positioned the spot or where they've positioned the spot and the spread. Well, let's say, so we got Christmas Day of 1996, we got all the players in place, Field Sister, Jamie Gorlick, Janet Reno, Norman Inkster, Vicky Huney, and so on. They've set up the Foreign Fugitive File for al-Qaeda, and they're ready to take on another target. So they heard that David Hawkins proposes a threat, and that my birthday is on the 7th of August, and of course I'm got slightly tongue-in-cheek here, Phil, but I'm speculating. So they say to themselves, I wonder if we can pull off a major attack on American targets in Tanzania and Kenya on the birthday of the grandson of the former master of the Worshipful Company of Horners, Frank Bernard Hawkins, who was my grandfather. And again, I'm sure that I wasn't the particular day they selected, but what is important is they were able to pick a certain day, which is the 7th of August. And if anything this year is to guide by, that's the end of Ramadan, the Ramadan fasting period. And it's a feast. So if they can demonstrate that they can carry out an attack and kill lots of Americans and humiliate America abroad at the end of Ramadan, at least from a propaganda point of view, although everyone recognizes America has the greatest military forces in the world, it makes them look stupid and incompetent if their citizens and their soldiers can be killed in large numbers at those two places. And the important thing to note is that the explosions that went off in the Dar es Salaam embassy in Tanzania and the explosions that went off in the Nairobi, United States Embassy in Nairobi in Kenya, were synchronized. 1998. To synchronize them, you need GPS signals and stratum zero timing, which would be described by the City of London livery companies as bona vacantia, that is ownerless goods. That is, no one owns the precise timing signals. You might own the less precise timing signals, but the owners of the precise timing signals are the operators of the cesium fountain clock at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington in the custody of Serco. So Serco would have had to have been involved in order to synchronize the satellite ignition and detonation signals, timed and placed with the bombs to kill a precise number of victims, Americans. And by precise, I mean incredibly precise. I don't have in my head how many people were killed in the embassy in Nairobi. But my prediction would be, let's say, what if it's 100, the spread bet escrow, which would be KPMG, which has offices or has had offices in Kenya since, I believe, 1949 under a different name. And remember, we're talking about Norman Inkster being the head of forensic practice at KPMG. So he would have been able to set this up. By placing and timing the bombs in that embassy building and knowing what time of day and what the office population would be, and adjusting the yield of the bombs because the British have patented dial-yield nuclear bombing technology dating back, I believe, to the 60s, where you can literally send a timing signal with a period of separation between the high temperature part and the high detonation part that actually gives you a yield that's quite precisely controlled. So using Serco and the worshipful company of Skinners and Merchant Taylors and KPMG and the al-Qaeda Foreign Fugitive File in the custody of Phil Sister, they would have been able to dial the body count within the spread in Dar es Salaam and in Nairobi and make America look helpless. And that's the game plan. So Field 1228, I don't think America can stay helpless for much longer. I certainly hope not. I think it's near the half hour. Do you want to close off?
Yeah, and then I just put a note up in the chat room that I have to keep this shop open until, I don't have to, but I'm going to until closer to 3 o'clock. So as soon as you and I say goodbye, David, we're going to shut this down, put it up on the cloud, and then we have another show queued up where Pastor Clyde and I are going to, it's actually going to be Pastor Clyde doing 90% of the talking. And I'm not sure what he's going to talk about, but is it Romans 8? Yeah, it's going to be Romans 8, 28 to 30. And so if anybody wants to get a brief and solid education on Romans 8, 28 to 30, I invite you to stay put. And so I don't know if Ginger's here. I don't think so. Mensa's not here. So David, if you're ready to say goodbye, I'll hang up on you and then I'll hang up on me and then we'll start the show over again after I post this show to the internet.
Okay, thanks, Field. So goodbye and look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, and I'll probably have chapter 25 done today or tomorrow. It's all sort of up to when Craig and Tim can handle it. So from the Abel Danger C2CSI show, we say goodbye now until Monday. And if anybody wants to learn some very useful information about Romans, there's a link you can hit and we'll start in 2 minutes. Thank you. Bye-bye, David.
Yeah, bye, Phil. And so I'll just sign off on Skype. So bye, Clyde. Have a good
see you
show
later, David.
after the half hour.
Okay, we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.